The holographic transmission flickered to life above the United Nations Assembly Hall, casting an eerie blue glow across the faces of representatives from every nation on Earth. The creature that materialized was magnificent in its alien horror. 12 feet tall, with crystalline skin that refracted light into prismatic patterns, and 6 arms that moved with predatory grace. Behind it, the silhouettes of a dozen other species stood in formation, each more imposing than the last. "I am High Regent Veltharion of the Galactic Sovereignty Coalition," the creature spoke, its voice translated into every human language simultaneously. "You will submit to our authority. Your species will serve as the laborer caste in our expanding empire. Resistance is futile." The silence that followed was deafening. Veltharion's 6 eyes studied the primitive gathering before him, noting their fragile forms, their crude architecture, their laughably simple technology. Earth had been marked for integration for decades, a backwater planet whose only value lay in its abundant resources and the hardy nature of its dominant species. "You have 72 of your planetary rotations to dismantle your governments and surrender your weapons," Veltharion continued. "Any attempt at resistance will result in the complete sterilization of your world. We have done this to 17 civilizations before you. Each believed they were special. Each was wrong." Ambassador Rillis Catha stepped forward, her diplomatic sash identifying her as Earth's primary representative to the emerging galactic community. She was a small woman, unremarkable by any standard, with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen too many impossible negotiations. "High Regent," she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, "Earth respectfully declines your generous offer." A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the alien delegation. Veltharion's crystalline features shifted into what could only be described as a smile. "You misunderstand, Primitive. This was not an offer. This was an inevitability." He gestured to something beyond the hologram's field of view. "Behind me waits the Sovereignty's judgment fleet. 800 vessels carrying weapons that can crack your planet's crust like an egg. Your largest military forces combined could not challenge a single one of our scouts." Catha nodded slowly, then reached into her jacket and withdrew a simple data pad. "High Regent, before you proceed, I'd like you to review Earth's official response to your ultimatum." The alien leaned forward, curious despite himself. In his centuries of conquest, no species had ever presented formal documentation after receiving the Sovereignty's terms. "Very well. Transmit your surrender documents." "Oh, these aren't surrender documents," Catha said, her tired eyes suddenly blazing with something Veltharion had never seen in a conquered species, absolute defiance. "This is our declaration of war." The hologram flickered as Veltharion's composure cracked. "War? You dare speak of war? Your species hasn't even achieved faster-than-light travel." "No," Catha agreed, "we haven't. But we've achieved something far more dangerous." She looked up at the towering alien, and for the first time in the conversation she smiled. "We've achieved the complete and total unwillingness to kneel." Behind her, every human representative stood in unison. No words were spoken. No battle. Cries uttered. The message was clear in their collective silence. Earth would not bow. Veltharion's laugh was like breaking glass. "Then you have chosen extinction. The Judgment Fleet moves at dawn." The transmission ended, leaving the assembly hall in darkness. In that darkness, Catha spoke 3 words that would echo through the galaxy for generations. "Let them come." 72. Hours later, the Sovereignty's Judgment Fleet materialized at the edge of Earth's solar system like a constellation of death. 800 vessels, each the size of a small city, their hulls gleaming with weapons that had reduced entire worlds to ash. On the command ship, Veltharion stood before his tactical display, watching the primitive blue world spin helplessly. In the void. Sensors detect no defensive installations, reported Sub-Commander Crixtel, his reptilian features twisted in confusion. No orbital platforms, no shield generators, no fleet formations. It's as if they're not even trying to defend themselves. Veltharian's crystalline fingers drummed against the command console. In his 3 centuries of conquest, he had never encountered a species that simply ignored their own impending annihilation. The humans had gone silent after their declaration of war, offering no further communication, no desperate pleas for mercy, no last-minute surrender. Perhaps they've already accepted their fate, suggested Battle Coordinator Nixandra, her forearms manipulating tactical holograms with practiced efficiency. Some species simply break when faced with inevitable defeat. But Veltharian couldn't shake the memory of the human ambassador's eyes. That blazing defiance that had seemed so genuine, so utterly uncompromising. He had seen desperation before, had witnessed the bravado of doomed civilizations. This had been different. This had been certainty. Begin the bombardment, he commanded. Target their major population centers first. Leave some alive to witness the cost of defiance. The order rippled through the fleet. Weapons that could vaporize mountains began to charge, their energy signatures lighting up the void like malevolent stars. The humans would have approximately 17 minutes to contemplate their hubris before the first wave reached their planet. 16 minutes passed. "Sir," Crixtel's voice cracked slightly, "we're detecting massive energy signatures from the planet's surface." Veltharian turned to the tactical display. Across Earth's continents, thousands of points of light were blazing to life. Not the desperate flare of primitive weapons, but something else entirely. Something that made the sovereignty's sensors scream warnings. "What are those readings?" I don't understand, sir. The energy signatures are off the charts. It's like they're powering up something massive. But our scans detect no infrastructure capable of—" The tactical display went white. When the sensors recalibrated, Veltharian stared at an impossibility. The space around Earth had filled with ships, human ships, thousands of them, materializing from nowhere with technology that should not have existed. They were crude by sovereignty standards, but there were so many of them, and they were moving with purpose. "How?" Nixandra whispered. "They don't have faster-than-light travel. They don't have—" "Communications incoming from the planet," Crixtel interrupted. The holographic display flickered to life, and Ambassador Caitha appeared once more. Behind her, Veltharian could see not the primitive assembly hall, but something that made his blood freeze, a massive underground facility stretching as far as the cameras could see, filled with technology that hummed with power. "High Regent," Caitha said, her voice steady as ever. "Thank you for the 72-hour grace period. We put it to good use." "Impossible," Veltharian snarled. "You cannot have developed this technology in 3 days." Caitha's smile was patient, almost pitying. "Oh, we didn't develop it in 3 days. We've been preparing for this moment for decades. You see, we've been watching you, Veltharian. We've been watching all of you. Every species you've conquered, every world you've destroyed. We've been learning from their mistakes." The tactical display showed the human fleet moving into formation around Earth, their weapons powering up with energy signatures that made the sovereignty's sensors wail. "You want to know what makes humans different?" Caitha continued. "We don't just fight wars. We prepare for them. While you've been conquering primitive worlds, we've been building underground. We've been planning. We've been getting ready for the day when someone like you would come knocking." Veltharian's 6 eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing. No species can hide technology of this magnitude." "Can't we?" Caitha asked. "You scanned our surface installations. You counted our primitive weapons. You calculated our outdated defenses. But you never scanned deep enough. You never looked below." The display shifted, showing cross-sections of Earth's crust honeycombed with vast installations, fusion reactors, manufacturing facilities, and something that made Veltharian's blood run cold. massive railguns pointing directly at space. "Welcome to Earth," Catha said. "Population, extremely unfriendly." The opening salvo came not from the Sovereignty fleet, but from Earth itself. Veltharion watched in stunned horror as pillars of coherent energy erupted from the planet's surface, piercing through space with impossible precision. The massive railguns that had been hidden beneath Earth's crust fired in perfect synchronization, their projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. The first wave struck 17 Sovereignty vessels before their shields could fully deploy. The crude human projectiles, nothing more than refined metals accelerated to relativistic speeds, punched through energy barriers that had withstood the weapons of dozens of conquered civilizations. "Shields at 60%, Crixtel screamed, over the chaos of the command bridge. "How are they penetrating our defenses?" "Because," came a new voice from the human transmission, "we've been studying your technology for 47 years. The hologram shifted to show a different human, an elderly man with sharp eyes and calloused hands, standing in what appeared to be a massive tactical command center. "I'm Director Mavros Stellern of the Terra Defense Initiative. You might remember us from the Kepler 442 incident." Veltharion's crystalline skin shifted to a sickly orange hue. Kepler 442 had been the site of a minor Sovereignty research station that had gone dark decades ago. The official report had blamed equipment failure. "That was you," Veltharion whispered. Stellern nodded grimly. 37 researchers all studying how to subjugate primitive species more efficiently. We learned a great deal from their computers before we cleaned up the situation. His expression hardened. "We've been reverse engineering your technology ever since, improving on it, making it better." The human fleet began its assault in earnest. Their ships were indeed crude compared to Sovereignty vessels, but they moved with coordination that spoke of decades of training. More importantly, they fought with a ferocity that none of the conquered species had ever displayed. "They're targeting our communication arrays," Nixandra reported as another wave of human projectiles tore through the Sovereignty formation. "They know exactly where our weak points are." On the display, human fighters swarmed around Sovereignty cruisers like angry wasps, their weapons firing bursts of energy that should have been impossible to generate with their technology level. But these weren't traditional energy weapons. They were fusion torches, crude but devastatingly effective when applied with surgical precision. "Break formation," Veltharion commanded. "Scatter and regroup. Use evasive—" The transmission from Earth cut him off. Stellern was speaking rapidly. Into his communication array, "All units, pattern Epsilon 7. Show them why we call it the Sovereignty Shredder." What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. The human fleet didn't scatter or break formation. Instead, they formed a three-dimensional lattice around the Sovereignty vessels, creating overlapping fields of fire that made evasion impossible. Every movement the aliens made only positioned them for another devastating crossfire. "Sir!" Crixtel's voice was barely controlled panic. "We've lost 230 vessels. Our battle lines are completely compromised." Veltharion stared at the tactical display in disbelief. In less than an hour, the humans had destroyed nearly a third of his fleet. These weren't the desperate last gasps of a doomed civilization. This was a coordinated military operation executed with the precision of a species that had been preparing for this exact scenario. "How?" he whispered. As if reading his thoughts, Ambassador Catha reappeared on the communication channel. She was no longer in the diplomatic chambers, but suited in what appeared to be military armor, standing on what was clearly the bridge of a warship. "You want to know how we did it?" she asked, her voice carrying over the sounds of battle. "It's simple. While you were busy conquering species that knelt, we were busy learning from the ones that fought back." The display behind her showed archived footage, Sovereignty attacks on dozens of worlds, each ending in conquest and subjugation. Every species you destroyed, every world you burned, every final transmission they sent into the void, we heard them all. We cataloged your tactics, your weapons, your strategies. We learned from their mistakes. Veltharion felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries: fear. But more than that, Keitha continued, we learned something you never bothered to understand. The difference between a species that fights to survive and a species that fights because surrender is literally inconceivable. Another wave of human vessels emerged from behind Earth's moon, these ones larger and more heavily armed than the first wave. You see, High Regent, you made one critical error in your calculations. You assumed we were like every other species you've encountered. You assumed we would eventually break. Keitha's smile was sharp as a blade. We don't break. We adapt. 6 hours into the battle, the Sovereignty's judgment fleet was no longer a fleet. It was wreckage spinning through the void, debris fields marking where once mighty warships had met their end against human ingenuity and determination. Veltharion's command ship limped through space, its shields flickering and hull breached in 17 places. Sir, Crixtel reported, his voice hollow with shock. We're receiving a transmission from the Coalition High Command. The holographic display materialized, showing the familiar forms of the Sovereignty's ruling council. At their center stood Supreme Overlord Keth Mora, his ancient features twisted with fury. Veltharion, Keth Mora's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Explain how a primitive species has destroyed 60% of your fleet. Before Veltharion could respond, another voice cut through the transmission. Calm, human, and utterly unperturbed by the presence of the galaxy's most feared ruler. Perhaps I can answer that, Ambassador Keitha said, her image materializing alongside the Sovereignty Council. Supreme Overlord Keth Mora, I presume? I'm Ambassador Rillis Keitha of the Terran Federation. We need to talk. The stunned silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Keth Mora's breath hissing through his respiratory slits. Impossible. Our communication channels are encrypted with quantum encryption, based on 17-dimensional matrix algorithms. Yes, Keitha interrupted. We've been listening to your private communications for 12 years. Your technology is impressive, but it's also predictable. You rely too heavily on complexity instead of innovation. Director Stellern appeared beside Keitha, his expression grim. Supreme Overlord, we've been tracking your expansion for decades. We know about the Nexus worlds, the core systems, the administrative sectors. We know about the rebellion brewing in the Outer Rim that you've been trying to suppress. Keth Mora's four eyes widened. The Outer Rim Rebellion was the Coalition's most closely guarded secret, a spreading insurrection among conquered species that threatened to tear the Empire apart from within. We also know, Stellern continued, about the Void Engines. This time, every member of the Sovereignty Council reacted with visible shock. The Void Engines were their ultimate weapon, devices capable of destabilizing stars themselves, technology so dangerous that only the highest levels of the Coalition knew of their existence. You're bluffing, Keth Mora snarled. No primitive species could possibly. Void Engine Designation Omega-7, Keitha recited from memory, located in the Centauri Manufacturing Complex. Void Engine Designation Omega-12, hidden in the Vegan asteroid belt. Void Engine Designation... Enough! Keth Mora's voice echoed with rage and fear in equal measure. What do you want? The question hung in space like a physical thing. Around them? The battle had ceased as both fleets held position, waiting for the answer that would determine the fate of thousands of worlds. Keitha's expression softened slightly, but her eyes remained hard as steel. We want what every species you've conquered wanted: freedom, dignity, the right to exist without kneeling to self-appointed kings. But more than that, she continued, we want justice for every world you've burned, every species you've enslaved, every culture you've erased from the galaxy. Stellan activated a tactical display showing the full scope of human military preparation. Underground installations on Mars, hidden fleets in the asteroid belt, weapon platforms throughout the outer solar system. This isn't just about Earth, he explained. We've been seeding the galaxy with human colonies for decades, hidden settlements, research stations, forward operating bases. While you were focused on primitive Earth, we were building a network that spans half the galaxy. The display zoomed out further, showing signals from dozens of star systems, human settlements that had been quietly establishing themselves in the shadows of sovereignty space. Every species you've conquered is rising up, Keitha said. The Outer Rim Rebellion isn't just aliens fighting for freedom, it's humans coordinating the largest simultaneous uprising in galactic history. Kethamora's ancient features contorted with the realization of what he was seeing. You've been planning this for generations. Planning is what humans do, Keitha replied. While other species reacted to your aggression, we prepared for it. While they fought individual battles, we planned for the war. A new transmission cut through the channel, a young human officer aboard one of the vessels near Earth. "Ma'am," he reported, "we're receiving confirmation signals from Operation Yadash Liberation. 73 sovereignty strongholds across 42 systems are reporting successful human-led uprisings. The slaves are free." Veltharion watched his empire crumble in real time as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Conquered species, inspired by news of Earth's resistance, were throwing off their chains with weapons and tactics supplied by human agents who had been working in the shadows for decades. "This is impossible," he whispered. "No," Keitha corrected. "This is inevitable. You see, there's something you never understood about humans. We don't fight for territory or resources or power. We fight for an idea, the idea that no one has the right to make another being kneel." She gestured to the fleet around Earth, to the reports streaming in from across the galaxy, to the vast network of human resistance that had been building in secret for generations. And that idea, Supreme Overlord, is more powerful than all your fleets combined. The sovereignty's greatest weakness had always been its arrogance, and in the hours following the revelation of humanity's galaxy-spanning network, that weakness became their downfall. Across 12 sectors, reports flooded in of simultaneous uprisings, coordinated strikes, and the systematic dismantling of an empire that had ruled through fear for millennia. In the Andorian system, the enslaved Keltharians had risen up with weapons that materialized from hidden caches, their leaders coordinating with human advisors who had been living among them for decades. The massive processing facilities that fed the sovereignty's war machine were in flames. On Rigel Prime, the administrative capital of the inner worlds, Governor Zix Thul stared in horror at his screens as his security forces abandoned their posts. The humans hadn't just been spying, they had been recruiting, convincing, and preparing. Half his own officers had been working for the resistance. "How long?" Supreme Overlord Kethmora demanded, his voice transmitted across secure channels, to what remained of his command structure. "How long have they been among us?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Commander Epsilon 9 of the Sovereignty Intelligence Division materialized in holographic form, her insectoid features rigid with something that might have been respect. "Supreme Overlord," she began, "we've completed our analysis of the human infiltration network. Based on the sophistication of their operations, we estimate they began seeding agents throughout our territory approximately 137 years ago. The silence that followed was deafening. "Impossible," Veltharion whispered from the bridge of his crippled flagship. "Their species hadn't even achieved interstellar flight until we noticed them," Epsilon 9 interrupted. "We assumed their first contact with galactic civilization was when our scouts began observing their system 47 years ago. We were wrong. They had been watching us for over a century before we ever found them. On Earth, Ambassador Katha allowed herself a small smile as she listened to the alien confusion. Around her, the command center hummed with activity as human. Coordinators managed the largest military operation in galactic history. Director Stellarn, she called across the command floor. Status report on Operation Prometheus. Stellarn looked up from his tactical displays, his weathered face grim with concentration. Phase 7 is complete. We've successfully extracted 17 million civilians from contested zones. Phase 8 initiates in 6 hours. That's when we begin offering surrender terms to sovereignty forces. Surrender terms? Kethmora's voice crackled through the intercepted communications. You offer us surrender terms? This time it was Stellarn who answered, his image appearing on the sovereignty's command channels through methods that bypassed every security protocol they possessed. Supreme Overlord, let me be clear about something. We didn't start this war to conquer your empire. We started it to end your empire. But we're not monsters. Every sovereignty officer, every coalition official, every being who has participated in the subjugation of others has exactly one opportunity to walk away from this. The tactical display behind him showed the true scope of human preparation. Not just weapons and ships, but entire star systems converted into massive manufacturing and research complexes, hidden behind sensor shadows and asteroid fields. We've spent 137 years studying not just your technology, but your culture. We know which of your species were conquerors by choice and which were conquered peoples forced into service. We know which worlds joined your coalition willingly and which were burned into submission. The display zoomed in on specific systems, highlighting installations that had been thought impossible to locate or penetrate. Right now, human agents are standing next to every void engine in your arsenal. We know where they are, how they work, and how to stop them. Your ultimate weapons are offline. Kethmora's 4 eyes widened in terror. Without the void engines, the sovereignty had no way to threaten entire star systems into compliance. But here's what separates us from you, Stellarn continued. We could destroy those engines, turn them against your core worlds, end your civilization in a matter of hours. We won't. Instead, we're offering every single one of your species a choice. The transmission switched to show a massive space station that hadn't existed in any sovereignty database, a neutral zone where representatives from every conquered species were gathering. We're calling it the Liberation Conclave, Katha explained, taking over the transmission. Every species, every world, every culture that has been suppressed by your empire gets a voice. They get to decide what happens next. And us? Veltharion asked, his voice barely above a whisper. You get the same choice you offered everyone else, Katha replied. Submit to judgment or face the consequences. The difference is, we actually mean it when we say it's a choice. On the tactical displays, the scope of the human operation became clear. This wasn't just a military victory, it was a complete restructuring of galactic civilization. Species that had been enemies for millennia were working together, united by the simple human principle that freedom was worth fighting for. You see, Stellarn said, his voice carrying across the galaxy to every sovereignty vessel, every conquered world, every being who had ever lived under the Coalition's rule, we learned something that you never did. The strongest empire isn't built on the backs of slaves, it's built on the willing cooperation of free peoples. As if to prove his point, the transmission filled with voices, thousands of them, speaking in hundreds of languages, all united, in a single message that echoed across the stars. No more kings. No more masters. No more chains. The Galactic Sovereignty Coalition, which had ruled for over 3,000 years, heard the sound of its own extinction in those voices, and for the first time in millennia, the galaxy heard the sound of hope. 3 months after the Battle of Earth, the Liberation Conclave had grown from a single space station to an entire star system dedicated to the unprecedented task of rebuilding galactic civilization. Representatives from over 400 species gathered in the massive assembly halls of New Geneva Station, their voices creating a cacophony of languages that the universal translators struggled to keep pace with. Ambassador Catha stood at the podium, no longer wearing the simple diplomatic sash of Earth's representative, but the more complex insignia of the conclave's elected speaker, a position she had never sought but could not refuse when nominated by unanimous consent. "The question before us today," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the assembly, "is not what to do with the former sovereignty leadership. We've already established the accountability tribunals for that. The question is, what do we build in place of what we've torn down?" In the observation galleries above, former sovereignty officials sat in designated sections, their fates already decided by the very species they had once oppressed. Most had chosen the path of cooperation, providing intelligence and resources, to help dismantle the systems of oppression they had once maintained. Some had not, and their trials were still ongoing. Veltharion was among those who had chosen cooperation. The former High Regent sat quietly in the gallery, his crystalline, features dulled by something that might have been shame or simply exhaustion. He had spent weeks providing detailed intelligence about sovereignty operations, and his cooperation had saved countless lives during the transition. "The Terran delegation," Catha continued, "has prepared a preliminary framework for what we're calling the Galactic Cooperation Compact. But before we proceed, I want to make something absolutely clear." She gestured to the human delegation, seated to her right. A small group compared to the vast assemblies of other species, but their presence seemed to command attention nonetheless. "Humanity will not be your new overlords. We didn't fight this war to replace one empire with another. We fought it to ensure that no empire could ever again hold the galaxy in chains." Director Stellern rose from his seat in the human delegation. Age had caught up with him in the months since the war began, but his eyes remained sharp as ever. "The compact is built on 3 fundamental principles," he announced. "First, no species has the right to subjugate another. Second, every sentient being has the right to self-determination. Third, the resources of the galaxy belong to all its inhabitants, not just the strongest." A murmur of discussion rippled through the assembly. These were radical concepts in a galaxy that had known only conquest and submission for millennia. "But how do we enforce such principles?" called out Representative Thixera of the Centaurian Federation, her tentacles writhing with agitation. "Without central authority, without the threat of overwhelming force, what prevents the return of conquest?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. It was the same question that had plagued every attempt at galactic governance. "How to you maintain peace without the tools of war?" "We enforce it," said a new voice, "by making cooperation more profitable than conquest." The speaker was Admiral Nexus Voltarine, the human officer who had coordinated the liberation of the Outer Rim. She was young by human standards, but her tactical brilliance had earned her respect across the galaxy. "Every attempt at galactic governance has failed because it was built on the assumption that someone had to be in charge," Voltarine explained. "The sovereignty maintained order through fear. The ancient republic maintained order through bureaucracy. Both collapsed because they tried to impose unity from above." She activated a holographic display showing the current state of the galaxy, free worlds, liberated systems, and the vast network of cooperation that had emerged in the wake of the sovereignty's fall. "What we're proposing is different. Instead of a government, we're building a framework. Instead of laws, we're creating incentives. Instead of punishment, we're offering reward." The display showed trade routes, resource-sharing agreements, and collaborative research projects that had emerged organically as species worked together to rebuild their shattered worlds. "The compact doesn't tell you how to govern your world," Voltarine continued. "It simply guarantees that if you choose cooperation over conquest, you'll have access to the combined resources, knowledge, and friendship of every other species that makes the same choice." And if someone chooses conquest? Asked Representative Mordak of the Hegemony Worlds, his voice carrying the weight of recent bitter experience. This time it was Katha who answered, her voice carrying a steel that reminded everyone present of why the sovereignty had fallen. Then they faced the combined response of every species that has chosen cooperation, not as subjects of an empire, but as free peoples defending their freedom. The holographic display shifted to show the current human fleet disposition, no longer the hidden force that had surprised the sovereignty, but an openly distributed network of ships and installations spread across the galaxy. Humanity has committed to maintaining the peace fleet, Katha announced, not as conquerors, not as police, but as the guarantee that no species will ever again face the choice between submission and extinction alone. The assembly erupted in discussion. Some species saw the wisdom in the proposal, others worried about human influence, and still others questioned whether such a system could possibly work. But in the observation gallery, Veltharion found himself nodding slowly. He had spent months studying human psychology, trying to understand how they had accomplished the impossible. What he had learned was that humans didn't think like conquerors. They thought like builders. The compact will be put to a vote in 1 week, Katha announced over the discussion. Every species, every world, every colony gets an equal voice. Not because we're forcing democracy on anyone, but because freedom of choice is the foundation of everything we're trying to build. As the assembly began to disperse, Veltharion made his way down to the main floor. Ambassador Katha was gathering her notes when he approached, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. "Ambassador," he said, his voice carrying none of the arrogance that had once defined him. "May I ask you something?" Katha looked up, her expression neutral but not hostile. "Of course, Veltharion." "Why?" he asked simply. "Why spare us? Why offer us a place in your new order? We would have destroyed you without hesitation." Katha was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of all the conversations, all the planning, all the sacrifice that had brought them to this moment. "Because," she said, "the moment we started deciding who deserved freedom and who didn't, we would have become exactly what we fought to destroy." She gathered her materials and began to walk toward the exit, then paused and looked back. "Besides," she added with a slight smile, "we're going to need all the help we can get building something better." 50 years later, the galaxy was unrecognizable. Where once the sovereignty's capital had stood as a monument to oppression, now stretched the greatest library in galactic history, the archive of all voices, where every species could record their stories, their knowledge, their dreams for future generations. The massive crystalline structure spiraled through space like a frozen constellation, its chambers filled with the accumulated wisdom of 400 civilizations. Captain Lyrian Morthek walked through the archive's memorial hall, her footsteps echoing softly on floors made from the hulls of decommissioned sovereignty warships. She was human, but her features carried the subtle genetic markers that spoke of the galaxy's new reality, the children born after the liberation, when interspecies. Cooperation had led to interspecies families, creating a generation that belonged to the stars themselves. "Captain," came a voice behind her, speaking in the melodic tones of the Andromedan dialect. "The council is ready for your report." Morthek turned to see Representative Zix Andra, not the battle coordinator who had once served the sovereignty, but her great-granddaughter, elected to represent the reformed crystalline worlds in the Galactic Cooperation Compact. "Thank you, Representative," Morthek replied in the same dialect, the universal translators now largely redundant as the younger generation had grown up truly polyglot. "Any word from the Outer Reach expedition?" Confirmation signal came in this morning, Zixandra said, her crystalline features shifting to what humans had learned to recognize as excitement. They've made contact with the Spiral Federation. 300 new species, all asking about the compact. They walked together toward the council chambers, passing through galleries that showcased the galaxy's transformation. Art from the Keltharian Renaissance. Scientific displays showing the terraforming of the dead worlds. Recordings of the great philosophical debates that had shaped the compact's evolution. Hard to believe it's been 50 years, Morthek mused as they passed a holographic display showing the original Liberation Conclave. Ambassador Keitha's image smiled from the historical recording, frozen in the moment when she announced the unanimous ratification of the Galactic Cooperation Compact. Hard to believe it almost didn't happen, Zixandra replied. My great-grandmother's journals described those first years as barely controlled chaos. They entered the council chambers, where representatives from across the galaxy were gathering for the weekly compact assembly. Unlike the hierarchical structures of old empires, the chamber was designed as a vast circle with no elevated positions or seats of honor. Every voice carried equal weight. Fellow beings, called Director Emeritus Volturine, now ancient by human standards but still serving as the compact's primary military coordinator, we gather today to celebrate the completion of Project Prometheus. The holographic displays activated, showing the completion of humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy, a network of automated manufacturing stations that could produce everything from medical supplies to starship components, freely accessible to any world that needed them. The last station came online this morning in the Magellanic Reaches, Volturine announced. Every inhabited system in the galaxy now has access to the resources they need to build whatever future they choose. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the assembly. Project Prometheus had taken decades to complete, funded entirely by human resources and built by human labor, given freely to ensure that no world would ever again face the choice between cooperation and starvation. But that's not why we're here today, came another voice. The speaker was Fleet Admiral Tycho Brahen, Morthek's commanding officer and one of the architects of the Peace Fleet's current structure. His expression was serious as he activated a new set of displays. Long-range scouts have detected something in the void between galaxies, he announced. Energy signatures consistent with a fleet, a very large fleet, moving toward our galaxy at significant sublight velocity. The chamber fell silent. In 50 years of peace, this was the first sign of potential external threat. How large? Asked Representative Mordak, his descendant now serving as Speaker for the Hegemony Worlds. Preliminary estimates suggest approximately 50,000 vessels, Brahen replied. Unknown configuration, unknown intentions. They'll reach the Galactic Rim in approximately 8 months. 50,000 ships, whispered someone in the assembly. That's larger than the old Sovereignty fleet at its peak. Captain Morthek stepped forward. Sir, what are the recommended response protocols? Brahen looked around the chamber, his gaze taking in representatives from species that had once been mortal enemies, now united in common cause. That's for the compact to decide, he said. But I recommend we do what humans have always done when faced with the unknown. Which is? Asked Zixandra. We get ready for anything, hope for the best, and prepare to defend everyone who can't defend themselves. The vote was unanimous. As the assembly dispersed to coordinate the galaxy's response, Morthek found herself once again in the memorial hall, standing before the monument to Ambassador Keitha, who had died peacefully 20 years earlier, surrounded by representatives from every species in the compact. What would you do? She asked the memorial, as if the marble could provide answers. She'd do exactly what you're about to do, came a voice behind her. Morthek turned to see an elderly figure approaching, Director Stellarn's grandson, now serving as the Archive's chief historian. And what's that? Morthek asked. She'd remind, everyone that humans don't fight for territory or power or revenge, he said, echoing words that had become the compact's unofficial motto. We fight for the idea that every being has the right to exist free. He gestured toward the stars visible through the archive's crystal walls. 50,000 ships sounds scary until you remember that we're not facing them alone. We're facing them with 400 allied species, 1,000,000 worlds that have chosen cooperation over conquest, and the absolute certainty that whatever's coming, we'll meet it as free beings. Morthek nodded, feeling the weight of command and the strength of unity in equal measure. Besides, the historian added with a smile that carried echoes of Ambassador Katha's own expression, if there's one thing humans have taught the galaxy, it's that the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't the size of your fleet. What is it then? It's the unwillingness to kneel. 8 months later, when the unknown fleet arrived at the galactic rim, they were met not by conquest or submission, but by a simple message broadcast in every known language. Welcome to the galaxy. We come in friendship, but we stand ready to defend those who cannot defend themselves. Your intentions will determine which greeting you receive. The response that came back, transmitted in a crude mathematical language that the archive's linguists worked feverishly to decode, would begin the next chapter in the galaxy's history. But whatever came next, the beings of the Milky Way would face it, as they had learned to face everything else since the day Earth declared war on the stars. Together, free, unbroken, no kings, no masters, no chains, just the endless possibility of what free beings could accomplish when they chose cooperation over conquest, hope over fear, and the future over the past. The galaxy had learned to dream again, and no force in the universe could take that away.